What's up, YouTube? Card Games United here. We thought just for fun we'd do another quick top 6 list in the spirit of the top 6 Xerath Dragons.
Also because the Coral game took a long time.
And the camera needs to charge.
But don't worry, next match we're doing is... And we'll leave it a surprise.
Also because I never upload these things in order.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, we thought because the G era is ending, it would be a good opportunity to do the top 6 strides. And actually today, because the list was so hard to hash out, we had to put some specific rules on it in our minds. So we thought we'd do some quick honorable mentions, things that really deserve to be on this list, things that were powerful enough to make the list, but because of the way we looked at the list, didn't make the list.
Mm-hmm.
So, honorable mention number 1 goes to Chronovizier Heritage. Really not a lot to say about it. Gives you an extra turn.
Give it an extra turn and no discard cost to it even, so...
A real serious finisher, and just... It made... Well, it didn't specific... That's part of the reason it didn't make the list. It wasn't the only thing making ZTBs relevant. There were a lot of other good cards in ZTBs that helped you propel the deck into the top spot.
Mm-hmm. You still have Gear next, after all.
One of the biggest reasons it didn't make the list is because it's so late game oriented. The cards that we did put on the list, we wanted to be useful at every phase of the game.
These are basically like the strides that people complained about that were just like, oh, that's all they need to go into for respective decks.
Kinda. Pretty much, in fact.
It's like, yeah, they have other options, like they could go into Avenir Phoenix, or they could go into Gear next.
Yeah, and just because that, in addition to Chronojet G and stuff like, and Dust, is just all the different factors that make the deck good, we didn't feel Heritage was good enough on his own to make the list.
I guess by that logic, you could also say Integral Messiah deserves a mention.
Yeah, so honorable mention number 2, Integral Messiah.
Also a really powerful card, makes you and your opponent have to draw 5 new cards, but since you're the Messiah player and you get a multi-attacking engine going, you're probably going to kill them. Problem is, I think it requires 3 or 4 face-up Messiahs. Might be 4.
Yeah, I think it's 4 face-up Messiahs.
So also, the problem is it's a really slow card as well. It's a good first stride for Messiahs, so they can run 2 of it, but...
And also, you may just be better off finishing with Neo Harmonics.
Yeah, usually that. Or Stark, even.
Or Stark, even.
Continuing on Link Joker, we could also give him honorable mention to Deluge.
Honorable mention number 3. God, I forget his name.
Chaos Breaker Deluge. Death Star Vader Chaos Breaker Deluge?
It's probably something along the lines of Death Star Vader Chaos Breaker Deluge. Again, it's another one of those cards that... I think this is probably one of the ones that came closest to making the list. Because it's just so powerful. It rips cards out of your opponent's hands.
Combining with Close and Molten, if you run that too, could be, get 4 cards out of their hands.
Free damage. It does a lot, and it really helped put Chaos Breaker back on the map, but it essentially had the 2 limiting factors of you can't use it as first stride, and there were other good cards that came out for Chaos Breaker.
Mm-hmm. Usually the deck now just dies to Nukatamba before they could even really do much.
And the other 2 that came closest to making the list, so we'll do honorable mention 4 and 5 together. Favorite champ and winning champ Victor. Because Victor's a real strong deck in the meta right now. Both these cards were very instrumental into putting it there. But they also had the similar problem of you don't want to go into winning champ in late game, and you don't want to go into favorite champ in early game. So, can you think of a 6, just so we have 6 honorable mentions and 6 on the list?
Wilhelma, I guess, also deserves
Oh, right, Wilhelmina. Wilhelmina also came very close to making the list. In fact, the deciding factor between this and our actual number 6 was just that we don't have enough experience with Neo Nectar to really comment on why it's good.
Yeah, I faced Dash a few times, but not as much as Big Belly.
Well, if you're going to give away the GOAT, we might as well get into number 6.
Barl, whatever his name is.
I really should have gotten the full names of these cards before we sat down for this, but I believe it's Omniscience Dragon Balrol, something along those.
Real good card, the GR from Zoo Boost from Awakening Zoo for Great Nature.
Yeah, this is essentially the deciding factor for this list was we wanted them to be those strides that you would always go into. And Barrowell is just essentially so always potent.
Speaking of which, did you ever get your extra copies of that you needed for your game?
No, I haven't as of yet, unfortunately. I'm kind of broke. Yeah, so Barwell, always good. Always gives you huge amounts of power. Usually gets you a ton of draws. There's just not a lot of situations in which you wouldn't want to go into him. The essentially only when you're being controlled out. And in that case, well, you're just kind of screwed anyway because you're playing Great Nature. But then that's why you have Zoa.
This card draws you a lot of cards.
Yeah, it can draw you a lot of cards.
It gives ridiculous numbers of power to your front row anyways, so they're probably going to hit.
So it's one of those cards that's good at every phase in the game. It really helped propel Big Belly from being a very obscure deck to something that can actually compete. I know I actually managed to pull off a win against Nubatama a couple weeks back with Big Belly, despite it not being one of the more recent decks. And the thing about Nubatama is it kind of eats anything that isn't a recent deck. As in, anything that doesn't come from BT 14 forward. Alright, so that said, number 5!
Marshal General Surging Seas Alexandros. This card is dumb. If you're playing Thavs, this is the only card you go into. I maxed it out in my deck.
So like we said, the deciding factors for this list was you always want to go into it, and it's instrumental in making the deck good. And this really embodies those two features, because you go into it as basically every stride, and it's one of the few things that keeps Aquaforce on the map.
It's the only reason why Thavas can still compete nowadays. The timing of the card is perfect, wave second or third wave, because it just synergizes so well with the deck, so you can get your draws off. Well, if you're playing the regular, if you're playing the draw heavy build, it synergizes all with Supreme Ruler so that you can get the restands on the after Alex is giving them power.
Just the huge amount of power that it gives, especially in late game.
It almost makes everything else in the Thavas G-Zone almost irrelevant. Even I think if you G-Guard first, in some situations you still may want to go into Alex, even though Lambros does not cost a counterblast and can be thrown down as the first stride in that situation. But Lambros' timing of being the fourth or more battle are just weird, so you wouldn't be able to get as much synergy with your rear guards as Alex gives you in the deck.
Alright, so that said, on to number 4! Goddess of Stillwater Ishikishima. So...
OTT was trash before this card
OTT was complete trash before this came out.
And then this card made it really good.
Yeah, so Ishikishima is one of the few cards on this list not from GZ series. And yet it still manages to keep OTT relevant. Just that alone is incredibly impressive. And just the ability to work around so many different things in the game to the point where your opponent just has to look at their hand, and if they don't have those perfect cards, well, they're just kind of screwed.
Yeah, I mean, this is, I think, one of the few cards in the game that actually restricts your ability to use G-Guards. I think the only other card that does that's the Maelstrom Stride.
I think so, actually.
Yeah, that thing is almost impossible to do. I play Maelstrom, and I've never done it.
Versus Ishikishima just being a quick Persona flip.
It's not even a Persona flip for the second effect, actually. The Persona flip's only for the
draw 2.
Yeah.
But I tend to always use the draw 2 anyway, because it accelerates you to GB8, which is... The GB8 is pretty good as well, and it's hey, draw 2 cards. Yeah. And that's another thing. She just draws you 2 cards.
Which makes it easier for you to achieve Oracle, to use the restricting skill. I mean, we
wouldn't have put this as high on the list because it does have some limiting features if it wasn't the singular card making OTT good.
Yeah, which will be the theme of the next card we go into, or the next 3, really.
Number 3! I believe it's something like Poison Sickle Mutant Deity Overwhelm.
Card's really good.
Yeah, so it draws a max of 5. A minimum of somewhere like 2.
And punishes the opponent for just like, oh, Dark Device, I will have all these rear guards standing. Because then you're giving Overwhelm a quad drive and a crit.
Yeah.
So this is one of those cards that gives the opponent almost like no correct way to deal with it. I guess maybe one of the ways is countercharging on their turn, but...
Like, having only 2 rear guards is a pretty good counter to it, but at that point, unless you're playing something along the lines of, like, Deleters or... Tachikaze, I guess, but less so. you're going to be trying to play around it by just not attacking them. And in that case, well, you're just going to hand them the win anyway. And it gets overlooked, but the effects to give 2k for every face-down counterblast, hey, that can easily be 6k to all your cards. It can easily be 8 or 10. Well, not as easily 10.
Kind of reminds me of a faster voltage.
It's not exactly like a faster voltage, because the whole thing about voltage is he can give like 30, 40, 50.
Yeah, well, that's true.
But just the power on top of getting a ton of draws and potentially the quad drive, potentially a crit. It's just a real good card all around, and Mega Colony is... Mega Colony does not have good cards. Just period.
Except for maybe Optorandus.
Even Optorandus, though, like, unless... Because the card possession you need for Optorandus. That's the other thing. She makes Optorandus doable. Because Optorandus requires the discard. And so if you're not getting pluses, Optorandus is just going to kill you anyway. Because we're past the point in the game where stopping opponents from calling stuff is going to win you the game. Because, well, they just go into any of the other 10 strides we mentioned today. Yeah, so Overwhelm, a lot of power, draws a lot of cards. You go into it as every stride, and it made Mega Colony good again.
And it's getting reprinted.
Gosh, all the cards that got reprinted in that set could have gone on this list because they're all amazing, but...
I guess Gluttony Dogma could have gotten
but Gluttony Dogma you can't use as the first stride, unfortunately. And you can't use them if you're being controlled. So that's why Gluttony Dogma didn't make the list. Okay. Now, on to number 2. One Who Hunts Souls, Belam. So, the top 2 of this list should surprise absolutely no one.
Yeah, this card is dumb, but
like,
not as dumb as number 1.
There are 3 decks ruling the meta right now due to 2 specific strides, and ZTB, which we mentioned earlier, has a lot of different options.
So Darky Regulars is able to kind of win a lot of games now just because of this thing, combined with like Baleful Repressors or Guest Steals if you're kind of that person. Or
well, if you are that person, you could just chuck your grade 2 lineups full of Baleful Repressors and Doppel Vampires and just be like, hey, look at all the times I have.
Yeah,
look at this card restricting your G1s.
The BC11 Shard works well with this. I guess this card as a first stride is okay. As
a first stride, it's still pretty good because it still pops you off 1, gets you an extra card, extra soul charge, more power, and a quad drive. So, and then just the cherry on top that is the guard restrict, which can absolutely win games at almost any point.
Oh, it's like the opponent has a 14-card hand? Oh, too bad.
Only your grade 2s are useful, my friend. How good are your G-guards? Because that row's 32, that row's 47. Okay.
I mean, there's just not much to say about this card. It basically just, like, restricts the opponent out of the game.
The thing about this one is it's real good at just being that card that does everything for you. It gets you your soul charges, it gets you some control, excuse me, it gets you some plussing, and it has a serious finishing potential built into it. So there's just no aspect of the game, essentially, that this card doesn't do well.
Thank God he's a Persona flip, which is what's also the saving factor of number 1.
If he had been a GR, if either of these 2 had been the GRs, you know that there just would be no meta anymore. It would just be those. Unless they both were, in which case it would be the 2 of them. Alright, that said, moving on to number 1, in a move that surprises absolutely no one.
Evil Eye Vidaya Emperor. I think that's the name?
I think it's Vatia.
Vatia, I think... I'm not gonna get the card. It's Evil Eye Vidaya Emperor Shiranui Rene. This card is absolutely dumb and something should have been done about it.
So let's cover all the things it does. It rips 2 cards out of your opponent's hand. It gives you 2 free attacks. It gives you power on those attacks. It prevents your opponent from using their effects of those cards.
For the turn, so they can't even call Broken Hearts. And then even after the Broken Hearts are dominated, they can't use their effects. Because it says until the end of the turn.
The thing about this card is it's just so much of a damned if you do, damned if you don't situation. The
there's
only
no,
real way
there is no right decision with this card when you're playing against it.
The only real way to play against it is just keep yourself at low damage, and even then, you're sort of just accepting the fact that you're going to eat 2 damage.
Plus, and they can just un-guy you anyways.
Lose cards because of it. It's just the pure number of situations where this card just is automatically... I guess you could make the argument that maybe this doesn't deserve number 1 because Zanki is also instrumental in making the deck so good.
Am I allowed to complain about this card since I'm a big abuser of it?
Sure. Go ahead and jam that log in your eye.
I mean, like, this card is just not fun to play against. I think recently I finished my blaster deck, and like...
Honestly, it's not that fun to play either.
Oh, yeah.
In fairness, on this channel, we have had a lot of crazy times with it, just because of me constantly thinking of ways to mess with it.
You mean that Tachikaze?
Go back and watch the Tachikaze or Dark Irregular videos. You'll see some fun play arounds. But yeah, Rene is basically single-handedly ruling the meta right now, because he is, simply put, the best stride. He doesn't exactly have that same feature of Belam of just being good at everything, but the thing he's good at is just murdering your opponent.
It's just a ton of pressure that almost no deck can deal with. You could have a 12-card hand and it's probably going to still kill you if you're at 4.
Like, he takes a minimum of 2 cards away from you, no matter what. And I don't think there's anything else that can say that short of, like, what's his name? Drachma.
Oh, well, Drachma could take 4 away in this deck.
Well, Drachma takes 2 cards away from you guaranteed, because you still get the ride and any on-ride effects.
I mean, I guess Deluge and Close combined would actually hard advantage take more cards away, but that's it. They're just taking the cards away. They do nothing out. This will make them attack you for at least 10k guard.
Unless, of course, you call your 10k guards, but in that case, you've lost the 10k guards anyway.
Well, no, they're still going to take 10k because they're 19. Any trigger will lose.
If you're at GB3.
Yeah.
Which, by the way, GB3, really, Bushy? Come on!
You could have just honestly given it the 10k. That's all it needed.
You could have given it GB4. You could have made it require 2 or more face-up Shirinuis. You could have done any number of things to balance this card at all, but it is just the finisher to end all finishers, and it's active from your first stride.
Yep, so they can rip 2 cards from your hand, even if the only way you can really get around it is retrolling them by playing draw triggers, which I guess is a way you win through this card, but then they can still plus off the bears. And
I haven't checked if there's anything that just has, like, continuous your Vanguard gets power. Actually, there's a couple of things like that, which I guess kind of work around it a little bit.
I mean, the new Riviere stuff, I think there's a card in Riviere that gives your Vanguard, like, a permanent ability where she gives resist to all of your field, so it does save you from one of the Rene attacks, but Rene gets around resist anyway, so they could still probably die to this card.
So that's the thing, you have to think about ways you could counterplay this, and there just aren't a lot.
The only time I think I've beaten Rene was, like, I think I was playing Sam's new Patama deck with my Thopus deck, and I think when he used Zanki's skill to force me to call, I had to call a resist unit so that my whole board was resist, and I had 1 less 15k guard, a crit attack. And then even then, I think I had to go into Megiddo just to get something off because he absolutely destroyed my hand that I had no pieces.
Yeah, so...
Card's dumb. if Bushi wasn't resetting the series, there would need to be some kind of ban on this, like, 2 per copy.
Well, I honestly think they could have eroded it just to make it a little more tolerable. In fairness, it's hard to complain about this meta just because it is diverse enough, specifically because at the same time they were releasing Dominate, they also released CTB and Darkness, and then even inserted a new tier 2 with Regalia and Luard.
I also just think that, like, Bushiroad kind of designed themselves... Well, like,
but the fact of the matter is that everything they put in is basically tier 2 tiers above everything else that had existed. Except for maybe, like, Victor, who was the top of the meta anyway, and certain things that can argue about having potential to fight back from, like, the Zoo Booster and things like that. That's the whole thing about Rene.
People complained about VMAX.
That's funny. That's the whole thing about Rene. It just says, you know, no old cards need apply. Because everything they put out in that set 14 just totally reshaped the meta. They just said, you know what, everything down at least one tier. Victor got pushed down one tier, but he was the only one who really managed to get pushed down just one tier. Except maybe Gridor, who you could argue was like, stayed hanging on at tier 2. Same thing with like Big Belly. Things like that were sort of fringe and still managed to be fringe because they're strong. They're really exceptionally strong, but they just have these very specific weaknesses that not a lot of the new decks played into. But that's a whole nother discussion. The point is, Rene, he shaped an entire meta. He's super strong on his own, and there's just no real logical balance to him. He's just so incredibly powerful that he really deserved to top this list.
I bet he could still be relevant in Premium, honestly.
He's definitely going to be relevant.
Nubatama will still be relevant in Premium, so all those people who were like, Nubatama's going to be dead.
Premium does at least give you the argument that, okay, if I have a 13k body, I can call down my grade 1s.
Yeah, and I guess you get bigger shield value, but objectively it's still 2 to 3 cards being ripped out of your hand, which we'll have to see how much those decks can actually draw into those cards, but this thing is still going to be...
Well, if you're playing the 8k grade 1s, though, you can't even call those, but you can still call, like, old school grade 1s.
Yeah.
7ks. And I guess everybody's going to be playing draw triggers again now that they're PGs, so there's that.
But they are 5k draw triggers, so that's something to keep in mind.
So, at the end of the day, that's the list.
I'm sure that you probably all have a lot of other things, like, oh, Bravest Peak should be here.
Bravest Peak is an interesting one. He maybe deserved a
honorable
mention, but we kind of forgot.
These are basically the 6 strikes that we just think that that's all these decks need to go into. Nothing else.
Bravest Peak, again, kind of had that feature, but he just didn't quite beat out Barrowell, because Barrowell could go in a first stride, and he's providing a similar amount of power over the whole turn, but I guess if you really value the 4th attack being a Vanguard again, even though it doesn't have drive checks. So, we were Card Games United. Feel free to like, comment, subscribe, and good advice.
Yep. Don't drink and drive.
I don't think you get the point of this joke. I don't like to give actual good advice.
Okay, don't spoil Infinity Wars.
There you go.
Even though I watched it yesterday.